Hi, Spy Campers. Today I want to read you a story about the life of a very important violinist named Itzhak Perlman. The book is called Itzhak, a Boy Who Loved the Violin. But before I start the story, I want to tell you a couple of things, give you a little bit of background, some of the things that we're going to talk about in this book. One is about polio. Now, polio was a disease, you may have heard of it, that seemed to come around every summer. It struck mostly children. It could kill them, or it could leave them unable to walk and paralyzed. Right now, we're dealing with a pandemic about a disease called COVID-19. But if you had been a child in 1945, when Itzhak Perlman was born, you would have been worried about this epidemic every summer. You don't have to worry about it now because a vaccine was developed in the 1950s, and you had that vaccine when you were a baby, so you can't get polio. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is, the other person I wanted to tell you about is Ed Sullivan. He's going to be mentioned in this book, and he's important. Ed Sullivan had a very, very popular television show in the 1950s and 60s and maybe into the 70s, I can't remember. But it was on every Sunday night at 8 o'clock, and everybody watched it. There were only 3 or 4 channels to watch in those days, and no videos or anything like that like you have now. So everybody watched the Ed Sullivan Show, and he had all kinds of performers, and lots of people were first seen on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then they became big stars. So those are 2 things that it's helpful to know about when we read the story of Itzhak Perlman. So it's called Itzhak, a Boy Who Loved the Violin, the story of young Itzhak Perlman, and it's by Tracy Newman, and the pictures are by Abigail Halpin. The Perlmans' tiny apartment seemed ordinary. A single room walk-up with just one window, looking out onto the traffic of downtown Tel Aviv with no bathroom of its own. Yet a little kitchen radio transformed this simple home. Graceful classical symphonies, lively klezmer folk tunes, soulful cantorial chants, rich melodies and vibrant rhythms filled this home and the ears and soul of the littlest Perlman, transforming baby Itzhak too. When Itzhak listened to music, a vivid rainbow of colors appeared in his mind, hues from dark green to red to yellow. Music brought Itzhak intense joy and tears. Itzhak loved it. By 3, Itzhak knew he wanted more. Young Itzhak had already chosen the instrument whose magical sound he loved best. He begged his parents for a violin. But for an immigrant family whose dinner was often a piece of watermelon and some bread, musical instruments were a luxury. Still, Itzhak pestered and pleaded. Finally, his parents bought him a toy violin. At first, little Itzhak laughed with delight, but he quickly recognized that his violin didn't sound like the ones those master violinists played. His music wasn't as clear as Jascha Heifitz's, as intense as Isaac Stern's, or as enchanting as Ida Handel's. Disappointed, Itzhak gave it a whack and threw it under the bed. Then the unthinkable happened. Polio swept through Israel. 4-year-old Itzhak became infected with this deadly disease. He lay hospitalized, fighting for his life. After a few weeks, the doctor announced that Itzhak was going to live. But Itzhak's body was weak. He couldn't move his arms or legs. At least he could go home. There were so many tasks to relearn. Raising his arms over his head, holding a book, grasping a pencil. The work was hard, slow, painful. Other 4-year-olds might have given up. They might have said no. They might have stopped trying. But a steady melody played inside Itzhak, encouraging, energizing, empowering him. A year of stretching, straightening, and strengthening paid off. Itzhak could move his hands and arms again, but his legs remained paralyzed. Itzhak would always need crutches or braces to walk. Crutches or not, Itzhak didn't just sit in his room. His family moved to the suburbs, enabling Itzhak to get to school on his own. They chose an apartment without stairs so Itzhak could move around easily. Crutches even helped his soccer game. To Itzhak, these adjustments were no big deal. When you're 4 years old, you get used to things very quickly. Running around the block, riding a bicycle, jumping off a diving board, all of these ordinary things Itzhak would never be able to do. But Itzhak made an extraordinary choice. He didn't become sad or angry. He knew the melody inside him gave him a different gift. Music got in his ears, gave him goosebumps, sent a chill through his body. Recognizing his passion, Itzhak's parents bought him a new violin. Crutches meant Itzhak couldn't stand like most violinists, but Itzhak declared, "I don't have to play standing up, I can play it sitting down." A bigger challenge was his big fingers, fitting them into the small spaces between the strings. Still, he figured out where to place them. Itzhak began studying the violin with a strict, old-fashioned teacher. "Do what I tell you, don't ask questions," she said. Itzhak had to practice for 2 or 3 hours every day. Making music filled Itzhak with joy, but practicing didn't. So Itzhak found some unusual ways to manage. Sometimes he would sneak outside watching construction workers pour concrete. Other times he boing, boing, boinged his bow on the strings, only pretending to play. If his parents asked why the room was so quiet, Itzhak explained that he was perfecting a new method, practicing inside his head. Yet young Itzhak developed exceptional skills, including his brilliantly bouncing spiccato, his vivid, varied vibrato, speedy staccato strokes, playful pizzicato plucking, smooth, slow legato. Itzhak's secret? He talked to the music, imagining the personality of the piece, what it looked like, what it felt, what it meant. His way of living, breathing, becoming the melody transformed his music into something extraordinary. At 6, Itzhak was performing with orchestras in Israel. By the age of 10, he was giving solo performances. Itzhak's warmth, joy, and enthusiasm became well known. Some people doubted that a violinist could play well sitting down. Itzhak knew he could. Later he explained, "I can't walk very well, but I'm not on stage to do walking. I'm on stage to play." Obstacles were ordinary things Itzhak just had to get used to. But the irresistible melodies vibrating inside his mind propelled and fortified him. And so he refused to give up. At 11, he wrote to the National Symphonic Orchestra, the Israel Philharmonic. I hereby request that you give me an audition to play. I have the following pieces ready. Please answer as soon as possible. Sincerely, Itzhak Perlman. Itzhak waited and waited, but the Philharmonic never responded. Then came an extraordinary opportunity. The world-famous variety television show host Ed Sullivan, whose show was watched by millions of families each week, traveled to Israel. Mr. Sullivan was looking for new acts, so Itzhak auditioned. Itzhak later admitted that he played pretty well for Mr. Sullivan, and Mr. Sullivan agreed. He invited Itzhak to come to the United States and perform on his show. Knowing just 4 words of English, mother, father, and good morning, 13-year-old Itzhak boarded a plane with his mother for New York City. And I want to play you a recording of Itzhak Perlman when he was 13 years old playing on the Ed Sullivan Show. On November 2nd, 1958, Itzhak sat on a stage of the Ed Sullivan Theater, smiled his broad smile, propped his violin under his chin, and began to play. Watching the young, round-faced boy, the audience became mesmerized. Within days, bags full of letters poured into the show, begging for Itzhak to perform again. His life would never again be ordinary. Itzhak performed on the Ed Sullivan Show 5 more times, and together with an Israeli magician and a hand shadow artist, he joined Ed Sullivan's Cavalcade of Stars on a 2-month tour of the United States. Recognizing Itzhak's talent and passion, the American Israel Cultural Foundation offered him a scholarship to live in the United States and study music. Itzhak enrolled at the Juilliard School of Music and began studying with master violin teachers. His hard work continued and grew in many ways, learning English, adjusting to a new country and to a large and unfamiliar city. Help came from Itzhak's teachers who nurtured the young man and his gift. What set Itzhak apart from the beginning was his sheer talent and enormous imagination. Itzhak was on a kind of creative high that never let up. Itzhak thrived at Juilliard. After graduating, he went on to win the Levin-Tritt competition, a prestigious international violin competition. The prize was $1,000, professional representation, and a chance to perform for 6 orchestras across the country. Both audiences and critics realized Itzhak's violin playing was extraordinary. When he was just 24, the New York Times declared, "It would be difficult to name half a dozen violinists of any age anywhere who are his equals in both virtuosity and artistry." Even so, the challenges continued. When it was time to have a career, the people had questions. They had to prove that the quality of what I had to offer was of the highest level. And to develop an international reputation for his violin playing, Itzhak had to travel the world on crutches. Performing in concert halls that lacked ramps or elevators was a frequent challenge. Itzhak admitted, "It's like they're telling you, here are our stairs, and you are not welcome here." Still, Itzhak remained determined to demonstrate that he was capable of being a professional musician. "I know all the freight and garbage elevators in the major musical halls of the world. I've stayed in makeshift dressing rooms that had to be built for me because the real dressing room was on the second floor." Itzhak's firsthand knowledge of the difficulties faced by people with physical disabilities motivated him to make things better. He is dedicated to improving access to public buildings, including hotels, airports, and concert halls. "It's not a hobby that I happen to do when I'm not playing the violin," he says of his championing of the handicapped. "It's part of what my life is about." Itzhak is also an advocate for children with special needs. He serves on the board of hospitals for disabled children in the United States and in Israel, visits wheelchair-bound children, and plays benefit concerts in the wards. In addition, he has appeared on television shows such as Sesame Street, using his crutches. Invited to perform with the country's and world's best orchestras, Itzhak has proven himself to be a world-class violinist. In 1967, he recorded his first 2 albums. He received the first of 16 Grammy Awards in 1971. In addition, television documentaries recorded several of Itzhak's international concerts, which went on to receive Emmy Awards. 3 presidents of the United States have honored Itzhak with medals for his accomplishments. He performs, conducts orchestras, and teaches students. Itzhak Perlman is widely considered the world's best violinist. Now I want to play you one more recording of Itzhak Perlman at a baseball game.
Please remain standing for the playing of our national anthem, to be performed this evening by 16-time Grammy Award-winning violinist and New York icon, Itzhak Perlman.
Thanks for listening. Have a great spy summer.